All right. Questions, true or false? Humans are guided solely by explicit beliefs and by conscious intentions.
False.
False.
Okay, so we know it's false, right? But what does our practice say, right? Our own practice, as we're in the busyness of our day, we rely a lot, right, on what is conscious and what we believe our good intentions are. Okay.
99.99% of information is processed at the unconscious level. True or false?
True. So here we are relying on the things that we know and the bulk, right? I know in a lot of trainings we use that iceberg. Here's the culture that's visible, here's the culture that's invisible. Same thing here, our conscious understanding and knowledge is far outweighed by the things that we have packed into our lives from our lived experience. From the media we watch, from our family lives, from our heritage, from our history, all of those things exist in that other space.
So with unconscious bias, we have that halo effect. So the halo effect is one positive trait about something and you carry it over to the perception of all people or all of something. For example, I used to work at Carleton College, right? And so I had a halo of Carleton College. I had a halo of Carleton College over my head. So when I actually went to rent a house one time, the landlord, when he heard I was Carleton, I automatically was on top of his list, right? And that's also was my privilege, right? So
another example, we just sat down with an employer who, we were talking about recruitment, and he said when he receives an application and that person has been an Eagle Scout, this was a physical type of job, they automatically go to the top of their list, which is good, right? I mean, Eagle Scout says something about someone, but the percentage of young men of color who reach the Eagle Scout level is like 1.6%. So even though that rises to the top, are you considering everything that went into making that decision to have that? Not that that candidate isn't worthy, but are you actively looking at the other things that are important?
are you stopping at that one trait?
Yeah, or is it that halo?
Yeah, that halo effect. Conformity bias, a tendency for people to follow the pack, because one person believes or everybody's starting to believe, you just jump on board. And the challenge with that is that you're losing diversity of thought, like diversity of ideas. And when we're trying to make these inclusive spaces, it gets complex, right? There's not just one frame, a minor lens that you're looking at. So we have to be really careful of the conformity bias.
Business trends will push us that way, right? There's a business trend toward this language, this ideology, this whatever it happens to be, and then we all kind of race over there and say, yes, okay, we got it, now we're in the sweet spot. So watching for that as well.
Affinity bias, the right fit. And I saw a lot of that actually when I worked for liberal arts colleges. Being the right fit was very important, and we talked about fit all the time. When I interviewed there was always, are you a good fit, right? And I had to learn how to reverse that to say, are you a good fit for me? Kind of go back and forth, right? But I think there's, and it's not just little arts colleges, but there's many organizations about fit. But if everybody is a good fit, then you're talking about, who are you talking about? Are you like me? Do you look like me? Do you act like me? Do you think like me? That's what fit really means. So fit is actually a very exclusive term.
I like it because people I like this, pointing this out because people tie this to culture, right? We want to bring the people in to really maintain our culture because that is what makes us exceptional in the workplace. We hear that a lot from businesses. And it's okay to maintain a wonderful culture, as long as you're thinking about it through a lens of equity and not excluding people who don't fit. I'm glad you brought up higher ed, because now there's this huge movement in higher ed to create, I know it's gonna sound amazing, to create student-ready colleges instead of just college-ready students. Right? The students are changing, what they're bringing with them is changing, so how do we create student-ready spaces versus laying all of that on students to come in and understand culture? Doesn't have anything to do with academic rigor, right? We're not saying turn out less qualified people. We're saying change the process as you onboard students, and it's the same in the workplace. Change the process as you onboard people so that you are receptive to what they bring to the table and not as concentrating as much on what you have that you want to preserve.
Gender bias. When one gender is given preference solely based on gender, the assumptions rather than the abilities. And this isn't exactly, I was thinking about this isn't exactly, business related, but I was thinking about a friend of mine who is, their whole men in their family, all their men cook, right? So it's like a gender bias, you could assume like if they were opening a restaurant, it might be the women, cooking, but it would be the men, because their whole family, like I don't even remember when their mom ever cooked. It was always the men cooking, right? So thinking about, what roles that, sometimes generally are women or generally are men, but does that mean man can't do the same thing as a woman or and vice versa? We really need to think about what's that perception.
And this has been changing a lot.
Yes, yes.
And one of the reasons it's been changing is that we've been pushed by policy, right? So we haven't naturally gotten into, but as if you receive state funding and you're an employer or state contracts, then you have to have a certain percentage of women, a certain percentage of minorities who work on your jobs. And that just shot through the roof a couple of years ago. Those percentages were drastically increased. So that is pushing employers, right, to recruit differently, to think differently, to think about the climate and culture that they have.
And my example is going to be when I did work as a director, I did hire a program assistant / administrative assistant who was a young black male, very different perception of what, he was probably the only male program assistant on the campus, and he was a person of color. But even when people walked in the office, they were surprised to see him at the front desk. But when I hired him, I was thinking differently. I was thinking about when we go back to these essential job functions, right? What can you contribute to the team?
Okay, so, I'll change that back. So I want to talk a little bit before we get into the job descriptions. The job descriptions that you write and that you put out and that you post are a function, are an output from your culture. So I just want us all to understand for a moment the depth of our work cultures and what they look and feel like. So I have these different examples of culture. Anyone want to pick one out? I think we'll only do one, but we might do two. So anything look interesting that you'd like to hear about? These are my experiences. Done with coffee. Okay, that's a great one. So I am a coffee drinker. I am not a fancy coffee drinker. I feel about, some of you have heard this, coffee the same way I feel about tequila. I'm also a tequila drinker. I am drinking tequila or coffee for a reason. Right? After the first few sips, I'm not really tasting it anyway. So I'm not going to spend a ton of money when I can spend a little amount of money for the same effect. That's my philosophy. So, and I am not picking on Dunn Brothers. I love Dunn Brothers. But when I go into a coffee place, that's what I call them, coffee place. I don't know what they're really called. And I go up to the counter. So I walk up to the counter and I say, I'll have a latte with low-fat milk. And then the person looks at me. And I think, okay, what don't I know? And they say, size? And then I look at the fancy words and I think, okay, grande. And then they look at me. And I don't know what I don't know. And they say, so for here to go, there's all these other questions. Do you want flavor in it? You know, all of these things that I don't know about that culture. And so it just reinforces the fact for me that I don't belong in a coffee house. But I can go to the McDonald's drive-thru and I'm going to be okay that day. Though even there now, they're like, do you want that on ice? Do you want that? Oh, just want some caffeine. So that's an example of things that come into our culture and that become mainstream, but don't belong to everyone. And those things are in our workplaces as well. And so I'll tell you another one. We were delivering training up in Fargo-Moorhead, big group of people, and we were talking about what is your workplace culture like? Really, what does it feel like? What does it mean to come into your workplace culture, regardless of who you are? And a woman stood up and said she had just started with a company. She is an immigrant from Africa, and she started with a company. And the first day she went to get coffee. So she opened the cupboard, picked a coffee cup, got some coffee. Somebody had said there's the coffee. And you know, as she was walking down the hall, someone said, oh, that's so cute, you took my coffee cup. You're using my coffee cup. Okay, no big deal. A few days later, you know, she's going through this same routine, and somebody's like, you know, that's Mary's coffee cup. So here's this whole culture around coffee cups, which are just mugs in a cupboard, that don't say, touch these, don't touch these, right? Touch this if Mary's not working, those kinds of things. They are written on those, but she had no idea of those things. Right? Couldn't tell, didn't know. So that's the depth of our workplace cultures. And if you think about the culture that you have, we talk lots and lots about the cultures at Mayo in different areas, but thinking about what types of communications are allowed, what types of interchanges are allowed, what do people need to know to come in? And then if you add, you know, someone who is in a wheelchair and your coffee mugs are up here, so not only do I not know how they work, but I can't even get to them. You have to think about these things differently in your culture. One more example from that same training. Young man, actually from the Middle East, had joined a car sales team. Dressed to the nines. We call it the guy effect. Dressed to the nines every time you see him. The full suit, looking sharp and snazzy every day he came to work. About a month in, one of the long-term salesperson came up to him and said, you know, what do you think you're doing? You're really making us look bad. This is not a suit and tie environment. So what's up with that? What are you trying to pull here? So imagine being this young man who didn't know the culture, who only knew this is who I am, this is what I'm bringing forward, to come into a culture where that's not the norm. And to feel that it was nettling people, like people were irritated by that, and he didn't even know that. Imagine what that feels like. So, I'll tell you the best outcome of that story. He changed to casual, except on Tuesdays when everybody wears a suit and tie. And then he can wear a suit and tie other days if he feels like it, but they all got on board with that. They're all like, yeah, you know what? We could step it up for one day a week. So just a great idea of how do you think about your culture and then be open to changes to your culture. So I feel it's really important before we talk about the jobs is that idea of culture. And that what you are and who you are does pour itself into the way that you communicate about. And so here are some just big things. You know, I heard someone just completed a full review of all their job descriptions. That's awesome. Don't let it be static, right? Plan this. Get it into your processes. Make it visible and open. You know, throw it out as far as you're able and say, hey, this is what the job description says. What do we think? People who work here, is this accurate? Is this correct? Does this feel like the job that you do? Does this feel like anybody could come and do the job? But build it into your process. Don't let it just sit there. And then, interact with one another. Interact with your networks. Throw your job description to your parents. That is a hilarious thing to do. Anybody ever tried that? Here, Dad. You'd have to know my dad. Here's the job description. What do you think What do you think? Does it say, what do you think it says? Now, my dad can't describe what I do, doesn't really get what I do. So if I give him a job description, he's like, not sure what any of these words are, or whatever. But it's a wonderful exercise to share your job descriptions outside of the normal circles. Just pop it out there somewhere. Say, hey, friend of a friend, hey, child of a friend, college student, senior, what does this feel like? What does it look like? Does it sound like the right thing?
You know, and I was just to go back and just, in my last job, and that was something that, maybe not everybody did, but at least HR said, update your job descriptions every year, you know? And for me, what I did was, you know, we had annual meetings with my staff, right? And at that time, or before that meeting, I'd say, well, let's update your job. Are you still doing what we hired you to do, or what else you're doing, or what does this look like, right? So we did it at least yearly. And so when those jobs became open, I was able to see how that job expanded, and you're able to say, well, do we have to, you know, step back a little bit and start over here and get back to some of the essentials, and where do we need to go with other things, you know, because jobs do develop as they grow, but you may not have started there. So sometimes you have to go back to get those essential job functions going as you're hiring new individuals.
Besides which, anybody ever have extra things added to their job?
Other duties as assigned?
Yeah, so that's another way for you as an organization or an institution to think about what are we doing, who's doing it, is it resourced correctly, all of those cool things. And again, to stay ahead of postings. Don't just throw something out because you're in a pinch. We're all in a pinch, right? Everybody is looking for a place, but let's think about that as well.
And I could give an example of that too, because I said I was applying for jobs, and actually I interviewed for one, and the job description said human resource coordinator / payroll assistant. But when I got to the interview, it was 2 different jobs, but on one job posting. You know, so they were trying, so because it was a really small office, she threw out one trying to get 2 people, you know? So she's, you know, I felt like saying, well, maybe you should do this, but that wasn't placed in an interview. But, but you know, just to be really thoughtful about the jobs that you're putting out there.
Okay, so we're gonna send around a job description. This is a real job description, pulled right off with Indeed. I like Indeed. Any Indeed users?